Hello friends, Paper Historian here. I'm glad to welcome you to my channel, where we don't just tell stories, we chase down the moments where history and legend blur until you can't quite tell which one bites harder. Tonight's tale takes us to 15th century Wallachia, a strip of land pressed between empires where one man decided that fear was a better law than parchment. His name was Vlad the Impaler. To some, he was a prince who secured roads, punished traitors, and held back the Ottomans with steel and fire. To others, he was a sadist who turned cruelty into art, leaving forests of corpses as policy. And centuries later, pamphlets, printing presses, and one Irish novelist would turn him into something else entirely, Count Dracula, a vampire who never really dies. So settle in, because this is the story of how a frontier prince became a monster, and why his shadow still lingers long after his head rotted on a spike. He is born into a geography that eats men. On one side, the Danube rolls like a border drawn by God. On the other, the Carpathians rear up like a wall thrown down by giants. Between them lies Wallachia, a pane of land always under pressure, Ottoman garrisons breathing at the river crossings, Hungarian nobles weighing tribute against convenience, Transylvanian Saxon towns tallying profit in ledger columns thin as blades. In the mid-15th century, sovereignty here is not a crown. It is a candle in a wind. The boy's name is Vlad. Later he will be called Chepes, the Impaler. Earlier, he is simply Vlad, son of Vlad, grandson of Mircea the Old, a branch on the thorny tree of the Basarabs who have quarrelled for Wallachia's throne since Wallachia remembered having one. He is born around 1431, some chronicles say at Sigishora, a Saxon town in Transylvania, where his father, exiled and dangerous, keeps a house above a coppersmith's shop. Others place his cradle at Targovište, Wallachia's seat. It matters less where he comes screaming into air than into what air he arrives, one always tasting of treason. His father carries a badge that gives the family its later myth. In 1431, Sigismund of Luxembourg, King of Hungary and later Holy Roman Emperor, reconstitutes a brotherhood meant to defend Christendom's frontier against the Ottoman Crescent. Its emblem is a dragon coiled around a cross. Its name is the Order of the Dragon. Its members are nobles with reasons to hate Turks and love pomp. Vlad's father receives the badge and a sobriquet with it. Dracul, the dragon. The boy becomes Draculia, the dragon's son, by nothing more occult than grammar. 2 centuries later, when an Irish novelist shops for terror in the index of Eastern names, that patronymic will glow like a lantern. But for now, dragon is politics. Dracul's badge opens doors in Buda and Prague. It also paints a target. Wallachia's throne depends on Hungarian favour. Keeping it depends on balancing that favour against Ottoman reality. Tribute has to be paid south, obeisance north, and whatever is left, coin, blood, pride, spent at home bribing boyars, noblemen, long enough to stave off conspiracy. There is a reason Wallachian voivodes rarely die in their beds from boredom. In 1442, the seesaw breaks. Ottoman armies sweep beyond the Danube to discipline Wallachia. Dracul negotiates in the only currency strong enough: his sons. Vlad and his younger brother Radu are taken as hostages to the court of Murad II. It is a courtesy that uses children as collateral. Hostage does not mean dungeon. At Edirne they receive training, language, even affection. But the lesson is visible in every servant's eye. Your father's obedience is measured by your distance from home. The years in Ottoman custody write hard lines on the boy. He learns Turkish and the geometry of Ottoman discipline, the patience of administrators whose empire runs on record-keeping and iron. He also learns that fear can be a policy. The Ottomans impale criminals, stake up the border roads with bodies like warnings written in flesh. The technique, imported through centuries of Near Eastern and Balkan war, is not invented by Vlad. It is absorbed by him, added to a toolkit already heavy with knives. His brother Radu, smoother, softer, more beautiful, starts to prefer Ottoman silk. The court will one day call him Radu cel Frumos, the fair. Vlad watches, takes note, files away anger like an unpaid debt. Wallachia, in his absence, continues its choreography of betrayal. His father, Dracul, tries to square circles, tribute south, promises north. In 1444, King Władysław of Poland and Hungary and the Transylvanian John Hunyadi gather a crusade. Dracul counsels delay. He is right. Varna is disaster. The Crusader king dies, cut down by Janissaries. And for being right, Dracul earns suspicion. In 1447, a Boyar conspiracy backed by Hungarian power ends him. He is killed in marsh or forest. His eldest son Mircea is blinded and buried alive. In the ledger of Wallachia, vengeance is always pending. News travels to Edirne, Murat calculates. A once useful hostage becomes a lever. In 1448, after Hunyadi fails in a second campaign against the Ottomans on the field of Kosovo, Vlad crosses the Danube backed by Ottoman riders and briefly takes the Wallachian throne. It lasts weeks. The dynasty, a rival Basarab branch, return him to exile. The pattern of his life is set: seize, lose, learn, return, each time more dangerous. He spends winters in Moldavia's court under his uncle Bogdan II and cousin Stephen, the one history will call the Great. He spends summers in Transylvania at the edges of Saxon towns that will one day publish pamphlets portraying him as monster. He studies the ledgers of Hermannstadt, Sibiu, and Brasov, and sees how trade rights law. He grasps something his predecessors have not. If Wallachia is to be a country, the Boyars must fear him more than they fear each other, and the towns must pay him more than they pay themselves. It is a tyrant's insight and a state builder's both. Those years also ferment the legend. Stories travel faster than men. In Saxon inns, merchants repeat tales of the Draculesti boys at the Sultan's court. In Ottoman barracks, Janissaries recite gossip about the dragon's son brooding over betrayals. In Hungarian palaces, courtiers characterize him as instrument or nuisance according to the day. The raw material is already there. A boy marked by hostagehood, a father killed by nobles, a youth trained by enemies, a land without stable law. It does not take a poet to extract darkness. In 1453, Constantinople falls to Mehmed II. The world changes in a season. The second, Rome becomes Ottoman. The frontier shifts from legend to riverbank. All plans must be rewritten. In 1456, John Hunyadi wins a miracle defense at Belgrade, halting Mehmed for a generation and fixing his own legend. In the same year, Vlad sees his moment. With Hungarian backing, he returns across the Danube and takes Wallachia again. This time, he will not leave quickly. What he inherits is not a country, it is a nest. Boyars who killed his father still sit on cushions. Saxon towns across the mountains demand toll exemptions and extraterritoriality. Peasants owe more labour than land yields. The Ottomans expect tribute that empties treasuries. He responds with something new, a programme. He cuts off the heads of the boyars he suspects at an Easter feast and impales others the day after. He brings in peasants to repopulate. He centralises coinage. He forces merchants to trade through Wallachian towns rather than draining profits in Brasov. Terror is not incidental. It is infrastructure. Western pamphleteers will later relish the lists. How he impaled thieves, beggars, adulterers, ambassadors who refused to remove their hats. He had the hats nailed to their skulls, the pamphlet says. Women who cheated, men who lied, and entire villages that defied. The numbers will swell in telling, translated into German as broadsides with woodcuts of forests of stakes, Vlad dining among corpses. Saxon printers will sell more units with every sharpened anecdote. It is partly propaganda, revenge for his raids into Transylvania, where he burned their suburbs to enforce trade policies, and partly the psychology of a Europe newly literate in horror. The man understands theatre, his enemies understand printing, but what he crafts in policy has its own coherence. A Wallachia less governed by boyar clans and more by a central will, a border that answers Ottoman demand with coin when necessary and with blood when possible, a message to every stakeholder that the centre will not yield. It is not kind, it is effective. Little principalities without sea or silver do not survive on chivalry, and always the name Draculia. To Latin ears it sounds occult, to Slavic tongues it means simply Vlad, son of Dracul. Mehmed, who knows men, calls him Kazıklıbey, the Impaler Lord. The sobriquet sticks because policy has become nickname. In his lifetime, no one thinks of fangs, everyone thinks of stakes. The vampire will come later, an invention grafted onto his branch by a novelist who never set foot in Wallachia and studied its geography through books written by Saxons who hated Draculia personally. But the seed the novelist uses is not fraud. It is a reputation for feeding fear, for turning cruelty into law, for writing policy with corpses. When, 4 centuries later, Bram Stoker looks for a name in a dusty library, Dracula will glow because it already burned. For now, he is still a man moving through a killing century, not yet a monster. He eats, sleeps, writes letters in a slashing hand, bargains tribute with Ottoman envoys he will later impale, cajoles a Hungarian king who will later imprison him, rides winter roads where wolves keep pace with history. The boy who learned patience in Edirne has come home with a profession, enforcing reality. The next acts will make the myth louder. The night attack at Targoviste in 1462, when he rides at Mehmed's army like a nightmare. The forest of the impaled that greets Ottoman scouts with policy carved into spine. The sudden turn from prince to prisoner in a Hungarian fortress. The later rehabilitation and one last reign. In each, the question behind the vampire will sharpen. What does a small state owe to gentleness when extinction stands at the door? He is not a creature of darkness. He is the shape darkness takes when a frontier decides to live. When Vlad crosses the Danube in 1456 and reclaims the Wallachian throne, he knows what his predecessors forgot. Survival depends less on treaties than on terror. Every voivode before him had juggled Ottomans, Hungarians and boyars, dropping balls until daggers fell. Vlad has no intention of juggling. He will grip power like a stake and drive it into anyone who wavers. His first months are bloodletting disguised as justice. The boyars, the fractious noble clans who killed his father, still sit fat in their halls. At Easter, Vlad summons them to feast at Targoviste. Chroniclers describe a banquet of meat and wine, laughter forced into the air like smoke. At the end, Vlad's guard seize the guests. Some are executed immediately, impaled outside the city walls as spectacle. Others, especially the younger and stronger, are marched north into the mountains and worked to death building a fortress. The message is clear. The boyars who once played kingmaker will play corpse instead. This brutality is not madness, it is math. Wallachia is not France or England cushioned by wealth. It is a frontier buffer, squeezed between Hungary and the Ottomans. Boyar infighting has made it brittle. Vlad's terror resets the equation. Loyalty by fear, stability by slaughter. He thins the nobility, repopulates with peasants loyal to him, and centralizes power more than any predecessor. For a brief moment, the throne of Wallachia is not a chair to be toppled, but a spike to be avoided. Foreign policy follows the same principle. To the Ottomans, he pays tribute when pressed, but with contempt. To Hungary, he presents himself as Christian champion, while quietly reminding Matthias Corvinus that his loyalty is optional. The balancing act remains, but now every gesture is reinforced by cruelty at home. Ambassadors learn caution. Saxon merchants, however, do not. The Saxons of Transylvania, German settlers who dominate Brasov, Sibiu, and other towns, enjoy privileges granted by Hungarian kings. They trade freely, avoid Wallachian tolls, and treat Vlad's borders like suggestions. Vlad resents the loss of revenue and the arrogance. When the Saxons harbour pretenders to his throne, he retaliates with fire. He raids their suburbs, burns warehouses, seizes goods. Captives are not ransomed, they are impaled. Saxon chroniclers, aghast, begin writing pamphlets, lurid tales of cruelty, forests of stakes, merchants roasted alive. In time, these pamphlets will cross Europe, printed in Nuremberg and Lübeck, spreading the image of Vlad as monster. The irony is that Vlad himself helps stage the spectacle. He understands that punishment in private is warning wasted. Punishment in public is law. He impales thieves on roadsides, adulterers in marketplaces, envoys on the border. His favourite method, long stake driven through the body, emerging from chest or mouth, victim left writhing for hours, becomes his signature. It horrifies, but it also deters. Crime plummets. Chroniclers claim a golden cup could be left on a fountain in Targoviste and remain untouched. Merchants complain less of theft. Vlad has enforced security at the price of humanity. But security is what Wallachia needs. The Ottomans test him constantly. In 1459, when Mehmed II demands tribute and Vlad refuses, Ottoman envoys arrive. They refuse to remove their turbans in his presence. Vlad orders them nailed to their heads, literally hammering hats into skulls. Word spreads. Mehmed smiles thinly. He has fought sultans and emperors. He recognizes audacity when he sees it. War will come. Meanwhile, Saxon presses work overtime. They portray Vlad as sadist beyond comprehension, boiling people alive, hacking mothers and infants, cutting off noses and ears. Some stories may be true, others are inventions sharpened by propaganda. What matters is circulation. In a Europe just discovering the printing press, tales of the Wallachian tyrant sell like relics. Woodcuts show him calmly dining among forests of impaled bodies. To Saxons, he is enemy. To German printers, he is prophet. To later centuries, he is Dracula. Yet inside Wallachia, peasants sometimes see him differently. Yes, his justice is cruel, but it is impartial. Nobles and thieves fall alike. For a peasant who has long suffered under boyar extortion, a voivode who impales corrupt officials is terrifying but strangely reassuring. Fear is evenly distributed. Vlad becomes both monster and protector, tyrant and stabilizer. In this contradiction lies the seed of his myth, the ruler who must be inhuman to preserve his land. His reign from 1456 to 1462 is a crescendo of violence and consolidation. He fortifies passes, reorganizes coinage, enforces trade laws. He cuts away boyar factions, asserts authority over church lands, and prepares for the inevitable Ottoman retaliation. In letters to European princes, he presents himself as crusader, Christian knight on the frontier. In practice, he rules like executioner. By 1461, the clash with Mehmed cannot be postponed. Vlad raids south of the Danube, devastating Ottoman garrisons, slaughtering thousands. He writes triumphant letters boasting of rivers of blood. Mehmed, angered but intrigued, prepares a massive campaign. The confrontation of 1462 will become Vlad's defining act, the night attack at Targoviste, when he nearly assassinates the Sultan himself, and the infamous Forest of the Impaled that greets Ottoman scouts with thousands of stakes. The Saxons will publish pamphlets of cruelty. Vlad himself will craft displays of terror. Mehmed will turn from assassination attempt to legend. But for now, in the late 1450s, Vlad has achieved something remarkable. He has made Wallachia coherent through fear. To call him vampire is premature. To call him tyrant is insufficient. He is both builder and destroyer, reformer and butcher. What horrifies Europe will, in a perverse way, preserve his land. at least until Hungarian politics turn against him and he becomes prisoner instead of prince. But that is another act. For now, the stakes stand tall, Saxon pamphlets multiply, and the boy raised as hostage in Edirne writes his reign not in ink, but in sharpened wood. By 1461, letters written from Wallachia read like dispatches from Apocalypse. Vlad boasts to Matthias Corvinus, king of Hungary, that he has slaughtered more than 20,000 Turks in raids south of the Danube. He writes the numbers with relish, like a clerk proud of his balance sheet. It is not exaggeration. Ottoman garrisons burn, villages vanish, and survivors stagger north to Edirne bearing stories of cruelty even Ottomans find difficult to believe. Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, listens. He knows cruelty. He has seen cities levelled, walls breached, heads stacked in pyramids. He knows propaganda. He has employed it himself. And he knows when an enemy intends to carve fear into flesh as strategy. Vlad is not simply defiant, he is dangerous. Mehmed decides on war. In the spring of 1462, Mehmed marches north with one of the largest armies Europe has yet seen. Contemporaries speak of 60,000 men, janissaries, cavalry, artillery, engineers. Vlad has perhaps 20,000, mostly peasant levies and boyar contingents he barely trusts. Numbers are against him. So he chooses terrain, season, and terror. First, the Danube crossings. As the Ottomans move north, Vlad scorches villages, poisons wells, empties granaries. The land itself becomes weapon. He stages ambushes in forests, cuts down advance parties, vanishes before full divisions can respond. His goal is not to defeat Mehmed head-on, but to exhaust him. And he succeeds. The Ottoman march slows, supply lines stretch, morale dips. Then comes the night of June 17th, 1462. Mehmed camps near Târgoviște, Wallachia's capital. The Sultan sleeps under heavy guard, banners planted, artillery resting. Vlad decides to strike not by day, not in open battle, but in nightmare. At midnight, his cavalry descends on the camp. Torches flare, trumpets blare, swords flash. Chroniclers say Vlad himself leads, dressed in black, aiming directly for Mehmed's tent. Confusion tears through the Ottoman lines. Horses panic, camels break, men cut each other down in darkness. Vlad cuts through guards, kills viziers, burns wagons. He reaches the edge of the Sultan's quarters, but the tent is empty. Mehmed, warned or fortunate, has escaped. The night attack terrifies, but does not destroy. By dawn, Vlad retreats, leaving thousands dead, the camp in chaos and Mehmed shaken. The Ottomans regroup, march again, and approach Târgoviște. There, they encountered the display that cements Vlad's legend, the Forest of the Impaled. Chroniclers describe 20,000 corpses, men, women, children, soldiers, prisoners, mounted on stakes outside the city. Rows stretch for miles. Birds circle, stench rolls. Mehmed's scouts stagger back, reporting horror beyond comprehension. The Sultan himself rides to view. Even he, hardened by sieges, is unnerved. He murmurs, "How can we fight a man who does these things?" The Ottoman army halts. The spectacle works. Terror substitutes for victory. Mehmed withdraws south, leaving Vlad bloodied but still on his throne. But survival comes at cost. The night attack and the forest of stakes become Europe's news. Saxon printers seize the story, embellish it, publish woodcuts of Vlad calmly dining among the impaled. German broadsheets describe him boiling infants, mutilating women, nailing turbans to skulls. Truth blurs with invention, but the picture hardens. Vlad is no longer just voivode, he is monster. Yet for Wallachians, the narrative is more complex. Terror secures roads. Merchants travel without fear of theft. Peasants, though taxed heavily, enjoy protection from Ottoman raiders. boyars dare not conspire. Vlad rules with iron through impalement, but he rules effectively. For a land on the frontier of empires, effectiveness is rare. Mehmed does not forget. Though he retreats in 1462, he maintains pressure, funding rivals to Vlad's throne. Wallachia cannot remain stable when Ottoman gold buys boyar daggers. Matthias Corvinus, uneasy with Vlad's independence, begins to waver. In 1462-63, Hungarian envoys arrest Vlad, accusing him of treachery. The same man who styled himself Christian Crusader is thrown into prison by Christendom's supposed protector. For over a decade, Vlad languishes in Hungarian captivity. Pamphlets circulate, stories grow, and his reputation swells into myth. To Germans, he is butcher. To Hungarians, he is pawn. To Wallachians, he is absent but unforgettable. The night attack and the forest of impaled bodies become the twin pillars of his fame. They prove what he already understood as hostage in Edirne: fear is policy. If men do not love you, make them dread you. If armies outnumber you, unsettle them. If Europe will not praise you, at least it will never forget you. The year after the night attack, Vlad rides a high wire between glory and doom. He has survived Mehmed II, humiliated the Sultan's army, and terrified the world with forests of impaled corpses. But survival on the battlefield does not guarantee survival in politics. In Wallachia, every throne has four legs: boyars, peasants, foreign allies, and foreign overlords. Lose balance on one, and the chair tips. By 1462, Vlad slips. The boyars resent his purges and terror. The Ottomans never stop pressing. The Saxons howl for vengeance. Worst of all, Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, the same king Vlad had styled himself as serving, finds it more convenient to sacrifice him than to defend him. Matthias needs Ottoman peace to secure his own realm, and Vlad's defiance complicates treaties. So the Christian champion of Wallachia, the man who signed letters boasting of rivers of Turkish blood, is arrested not by Muslims but by Christians. The arrest is dressed in legality. Matthias accuses Vlad of conspiring with the Ottomans, brandishes forged letters supposedly proving treason, and claps him in irons. In reality, Vlad is guilty only of being inconvenient. He is marched west, away from his homeland, away from the throne he fought to secure. For the next 12 years, he disappears into captivity. Prison is not dungeon filth alone. Vlad is shuttled between castles in Hungary, at Visegrad and Pest. He is held under guard, sometimes in chains, sometimes more comfortably, but always watched. He paces stone floors, writes letters begging release, schemes for return. Time gnaws. For a man who has ruled by terror and spectacle, obscurity is punishment sharper than stakes. Yet in captivity, his legend blooms. The Saxons see opportunity. With Vlad in chains, they flood German presses with pamphlets detailing his atrocities. The new printing press, barely a generation old, becomes amplifier. Broadsheets roll off presses in Nuremberg, Bamberg, Lübeck. Woodcuts of Vlad calmly dining among the impaled, stories of him boiling people alive, mutilating women, nailing turbans to skulls, forcing mothers to eat their children. Some of the tales echo his real policies of terror, others a pure invention sharpened by hatred. Truth and propaganda fuse into image, Vlad as archetype of cruelty. These pamphlets spread faster than armies. Merchants carry them along trade routes, students along universities, priests into pulpits. In Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Vlad becomes bogeyman. Parents threaten children, behave, or Dracula will take you. His name, already dark in Wallachia, turns into shorthand for inhumanity in Europe. Yet paradox lurks. While pamphlets demonize him, some chronicles quietly admire him. Russian and Slavic accounts portray Vlad as stern but just, defender of orthodoxy, punisher of the wicked. In Wallachia itself, peasants remember that roads were safe, theft rare, order enforced. They fear him, but they also recall protection. Terror, evenly distributed, could feel like fairness. Meanwhile, Vlad adjusts to captivity with survival instincts honed in Edirne. He learns Hungarian politics, cultivates allies among nobles, even converts formally to Catholicism to please Matthias's court. He marries or remarries, sources differ, likely a relative of Matthias's wife. Chains turn into leash, leash into alliance. By the early 1470s, the Ottomans press Hungary harder again, and suddenly Vlad is useful. Released cautiously, he is restored to favour. Matthias needs men who know the Danube frontier, and few know terror like Vlad. But his long absence has weakened his base. In Wallachia, rivals rise, Boyars plot, Radu the Fair, his brother who embraced Ottoman service, sits on the throne as vassal of the Sultan. Vlad returns only briefly, fighting for control again in 1476 with Hungarian support. He wins the seat once more, but the throne is fragile, his enemies many, his reign short. Later that year, he dies, ambushed by Boyars or Ottomans, cut down in battle, or betrayed by his own men. His head, severed, is sent to Mehmed in Constantinople, displayed on a spike as proof that the Kazakh, the Impaler Lord, is no more. The man is gone. The myth, however, has only begun. For while Vlad's body rots in an unmarked grave, the pamphlets keep printing. They survive in dozens of editions, translated, recopied, illustrated. They fix him in Europe's imagination as tyrant beyond measure. His name, Dracula, becomes synonym for cruelty. 4 centuries later, when Bram Stoker combs sources for Gothic dread, he finds those pamphlets, sees the name glowing, and grafts vampire onto Voivode. Vlad becomes immortal, not in Wallachia's chronicles, but in horror fiction. Imprisonment, then, is paradox. The years when Vlad lived least are the years when his legend grew most. Stripped of throne, chained in castles, he ruled Europe's imagination more thoroughly than he ever ruled Wallachia. When Vlad's severed head arrived in Constantinople, mounted on a spike and paraded before Mehmed II, it was supposed to end him. Heads on spikes were punctuation marks, final and indisputable. But Vlad was already a man who understood that terror survives flesh. He had built his reign on fear as policy, and in death, that fear mutated into something stranger. Legend. The historical Vlad is clear enough in outline. He was voivode of Wallachia 3 times between 1448 and 1476, a prince on a frontier between Ottoman and Hungarian power. He ruled a land riven by noble feuds, raided by neighbours, squeezed by tribute demands. He purged boyars, centralised authority, fought Mehmed II to a standstill, terrorised Saxon towns, and briefly secured stability. He relied on cruelty because cruelty was currency, and boyars obeyed, peasants endured, enemies hesitated. In an age when law bent to power, fear was law, yet history's clarity did not satisfy Europe's appetite. The Saxon pamphlets, born of trade disputes and political rivalry, painted Vlad as sadist beyond measure. They circulated stories of forests of impaled bodies, of boiling cauldrons, mutilations, feasts among corpses. Some tales were true, others exaggerated, many outright fabricated. But print did not discriminate. Once set in woodcut, Vlad's image spread. By the 16th century, Germans knew him as a tyrant's archetype. In Russia, chronicles remembered him as stern but just, defender of orthodoxy. In the Balkans, peasants muttered stories of a prince who made thieves vanish and merchants fear cheating. To Ottomans, he remained Kazakh, the Impaler. Even in contradiction, one theme endured. He was unforgettable. Centuries later, in Victorian England, Bram Stoker searched for a name to crown his Gothic villain. He found Dracula in books of Eastern history, an old sobriquet meaning simply son of the dragon. He grafted it onto a vampire tale spun from Irish folklore, Central European superstitions, and London anxieties. Vlad the Impaler became Count Dracula, immortal not for his campaigns but for his cruelty transfigured into hunger for blood. The vampire and the prince are not the same. Vlad impaled bodies to intimidate. Dracula drinks blood to survive. Vlad ruled Wallachia through terror. Dracula stalks Victorian women through fog. Yet the link was natural. Both feed on fear. The pamphlet Stoker read had already done the work, transforming political violence into mythic sadism. Literature finished what propaganda began. Why does cruelty cling so tightly to Vlad? Because it was his deliberate instrument. He chose terror not as indulgence, but as policy. For a tiny principality between empires, gentleness would have meant extinction. His cruelty horrified Europe, but it also brought Wallachia decades of survival. In that sense, he was less aberration than symptom, a frontier prince forced to weaponize dread. And yet cruelty has costs. Boyars conspired, Hungarians imprisoned him, Saxons damned his memory. In the long run, his terror preserved neither dynasty nor independence. Wallachia remained buffer state, tribute payer, battleground. Vlad died in battle or betrayal, his head rotting on a spike. His policies secured short-term stability, but no permanent sovereignty. What survived was story. In Saxon towns, pamphlets sold horror like relics. In Ottoman barracks, tales of impaled armies curdled discipline. In peasant villages, memories of harsh justice outlived his reign. And in Europe's imagination, Dracula became monster, the Prince of Darkness. Thus, Vlad's legacy splits. The man was a frontier ruler, pragmatic, brutal, effective for a season. The myth was a vampire, eternal, born of propaganda and fiction. Together they form a double image, Vlad the Impaler, both defender of his land and devourer of men. Dracula, both son of a dragon and father of modern horror. Perhaps that is fitting. Vlad lived in a world where survival required masks. Hostage turned prince, Christian ally turned Ottoman enemy, liberator turned tyrant. Death gave him his final mask, monster. And monsters, unlike princes, do not die. Our next story will follow the life of Ivan the Terrible, a man who is just as infamous as Vlad Tepes. So settle in, get comfortable, and listen along. He is born in a palace and raised in a kennel. The palace is brick and gilded, the Kremlin of Moscow. The kennel is the court into which his father's death throws him, like meat among dogs. In August 1530, Ivan, son of Grand Prince Vasily III and Elena Glinskaya, opens his eyes as heir to a state that calls itself All Rus and behaves like a family quarrel with armies. 3 years later, his father dies, and the boy who inherits a throne discovers there is no such thing as an heir in a wolf yard, only prey briefly protected by a mother's arms. Elena keeps the regency with ferocity and intelligence. She trims the boyar clans, Shishkis, Belskis, other branches with knives hidden in sleeves, plays them against each other, remints coinage, keeps the Tatars at bay, and tries to feed the infant autocracy enough order to survive his childhood. Then, in 1538, she collapses. Chroniclers call it a sudden illness. Rumour calls it poison. To Ivan, it is an abandonment. He is 8 years old and alone in a palace where grown men weigh children like debt. They do not beat him often. Beating a prince is risky. Beating his servants is safer. They do not starve him always. Starving a prince brings wrath if he lives. Starving his dog and letting him watch will do. They ignore him, which in palaces hurts worse than harm. He learns to read in the echo of footsteps fading as doors close behind courtiers who will not bow to a child. He learns to pray with the desperation of someone asking a door to be a father. He learns to love books that cannot betray him, chronicles that promise order, homilies that shout about sin so loudly they drown out the silence around him. The anecdotes that later harden into diagnosis begin here. The boy throws animals from towers, watches them break, and feels his pulse steady. He hides coins in corners and orders servants to crawl to find them, to prove they will. He alternates between terrified piety, prostrations before icons until his forehead bruises, and sudden cruelty, a pendulum history will see again and call by its proper name. Paranoia rehearsed as childhood. He grows tall, narrow-faced, sharp-eyed. He watches the boyars peel his world like fruit, taking bites in the name of temporary guardianship, lands parcelled among cousins, offices traded for oaths. He also watches something else, a country larger than the men who pretend to rule it. Rivers run longer than regencies, forests bow to no clan. He is old enough to understand that Russia's size and Russia's appetite will someday need a stomach stronger than any council. He begins to practice a voice that will later terrify the room, the voice that says "we" and means "I." He inherits a crown with ceremony nobody in Rus has worn. On a snow-bright January day in 1547, at 16, he enters the Dormition Cathedral and emerges not as Grand Prince like his fathers, but as Tsar of all Rus. The word is more than title, it is a costume cut from Byzantium's old robes. The Orthodox hierarchy coaxes antiquity into his hands, anointing with holy oil, coronation with Monomach's cap, the old legend that links Moscow to Constantinople, Constantinople to Rome, and Rome to heaven itself. Whatever the boy felt in empty halls, he feels now a formula. Tsarstvo is not boy of favor. It is sacrament. The people cheer outside in a winter sun that makes the Kremlin's gold look like it came honestly from heaven. He marries Anastasia Romanovna from a gentry family that will lend its name to a dynasty one day. She is described as gentle, intelligent, tactful, qualities historians long after will see as a dam holding back a river. With her at his side, and with youth's hunger for justice, he begins like a reformer. He is not yet the man who will roar, he is the boy who will organize. He gathers around him the so-called chosen council, a circle with more humility than pedigree, Alexei Adashev, a capable administrator, the priest Sylvester, stern and moralizing, Metropolitan Makary, who thinks in centuries and dresses policy in scripture. He listens. He convenes a Zemsky Sobor, an assembly of estates, to hear grievances. He revises the Sudebnik in 1550 to retune courts and reduce arbitrary brutality. He reforms the army with streltsy, musketeers, to stiffen the state's spine. He reasserts the service obligations of the gentry so that land once again implies duty. He holds the Stoglavy Council in 1551 to tidy church discipline and hymn singing, as if music could anchor men. For a while, hope looks official. The people, if a word can hold a country of peasants, gentry, monks, merchants, Tatars with old scores, breathe and decide he might be a blessing. Let the boyars gnash teeth. A Tsar who scolds them is a psalm fulfilled. Petitions multiply. Exiles at borders drift back seeking pardon from a young man who speaks of mercy with a voice that still remembers prayer. In taverns, men with hands too used to oars talk about the Tsar, who will make road tolls fair and thieves careful. In monasteries, elders who have seen too many winters write that perhaps Moscow has found its Constantine. He wins a war everyone says defines him. In 1552, he takes Kazan, the Tatar Khanate, whose horsemen have haunted Muscovy's sleep for a century. He drags cannon through forests, throws bridges over rivers, and starves a city until it cracks. When his banner rises on Kazan's walls, he kneels in the conquered citadel and prays to a god who seems, at last, to be on the Tsar's side. 4 years later, Astrakhan follows. The Volga becomes Russian from source to salt. priests christen, colonists farm, and mapmakers begin to draw a country that looks less like a dream and more like a design. He builds the Cathedral of St. Basil on Red Square to remember Kazan, a riot of domes like flames frozen into onion glass, a monument that looks like a fever remembered fondly. For a few years, the narrative seems stable. A boy wounded into vigilance, a reformer guided by counsellors, a conqueror baptized by victory. Then the hinge breaks. It breaks in, the way hinges in palaces always do, not in policy, but in the bedroom. In 1560, Anastasia sickens and dies. Officially, a fever. Unofficially, poison. Ivan believes the latter with the fervour of a man for whom grief is simpler, if it can blame. He looks at the boyars and sees hands stained with his wife's death. He looks at his counsellors and sees rebuke, not comfort. He looks at God and hears a silence that, to a man like Ivan, is insult. Paranoia, which had practiced with animals and servants, now stands and asks for work. He burns the fields of his own restraint. The chosen council dissolves. Sylvester and Adashev fall from grace. He begins the correspondence with Andrei Kurbsky, once a friend and general, now a defector to Lithuania, that reads like a duel fought with ink dipped in bile. Ivan's letters are scripture hammered into accusation. I am the Tsar, anointed by God. You are dog that bit its master. Kurbsky's replies are a mirror held to a face that cannot stand reflection. The people notice the shift, like animals feel weather. The Tsar, who once toured monasteries, now tours suspicions. He orders torture as if it were inquiry. He tests loyalty with traps. He insists on theatrical repentance from men whose only real sin was being near his grief. His spiky intellect, once used to revise law, becomes a machine for inventing guilt. In 1564, he stages a play, Only Absolute Rulers Know How to Write. Abdication without retirement. He leaves Moscow in a carriage loaded with icons, treasure and outrage, withdraws to the Alexander Sloboda, and sends back letters accusing boyars and clergy of treachery, theft, ingratitude. The city panics, the boyars count exits, the church counts souls. A delegation begs him to return. He agrees, on condition that he be given the freedom to punish traitors without interference, and that a portion of the country be carved out as his personal fief with its own administration and army. Thus is born the word that will define his reign's second act, Oprichnina. The people who had liked the justice that tidied courts will not like the justice that rides horses with dogs' heads and brooms hanging from saddles. But that is for later blocks. For now, it is enough to say that the boy who grew up in a wolf yard has decided at last that the only way to be safe is to be the wolf everyone else fears. What is he like, this young Tsar who prays and bites? He is a man of extremes, a mind like a knife whose handle is scripture. He quotes fathers of the church as easily as he orders flayings. He weeps at icons and then forces nobles to kiss worms in dead men's skulls to learn humility. He writes homilies on governance and then makes policy with whips. He is not mad in the clinical way later centuries will prefer. He is traumatized and armed, an orphan who found in coronation the only parent who would never leave. The idea of autocracy. How do people feel about him? They shift like wheat in his wind. Gentry officers love a Tsar who keeps boyars fearing the throne more than the gentry do. Merchants oscillate. Trade thrives when roads are safe, dies when fear replaces coin. Peasants count winters. Their judgments are long and cruel. The Tsar who keeps Tatars away is good. The Tsar whose tacksmen take grain while children cough is not. The Tsar who does both at once is a paradox they survive with holy icons and curses whispered in barns. Monks write two kinds of chronicles. One that praises a god-crowned ruler cleansing the land of traitors. Another that sighs about the ancient peace and hides names in margins. He is already a lesson. What happens when a child left in the rain is given a scepter forged from thunder? The country he rules is large enough to bear him for a while, flexible enough to bend under him until it snaps, patient enough to believe that suffering now means glory later. He himself believes it, which makes it worse. In the next acts, the dogs will run. Black-clad riders will sweep through towns, their saddles adorned with brooms to sweep away treason and dogs' heads to sniff it out. Novgorod will learn what happens when a city is accused of imagining a different sovereign. The Tsar will find marriage a problem no policy can solve. Wives dying, wives discarded, wives chosen from parades of daughters like horses at market. He will kill his son in a rage and then stare at the boy's skull until silence feels like judgment. He will write more letters than a saint and devise more tortures than a devil. And throughout, the people will live, as people always do, between the prayers they say at Vespers and the taxes they pay at dawn. For now, the crown still fits. The wound beneath it has just begun to itch. When Ivan returned to Moscow in 1565 after his staged abdication, he came not as Tsar reconciled, but as Tsar reborn in darker robes. The boyars, the clergy, even the common petitioners had begged for him to resume the throne, fearful of the state unravelling without him. He agreed, but with a condition that was less condition than coup. He would rule two Russias. One was the Zemshchina, the ordinary realm, left to boyars, councils and traditions. The other was the Oprichnina, his personal domain, carved from the richest lands, staffed by his chosen men, guarded by an army of terror. Russia, split by decree, was no longer one country. It was Ivan's experiment in autocracy, armed with fear. The Oprichniki became his visible teeth. They rode black horses, dressed in black cloaks, carried with them two grotesque symbols, a dog's head tied to the saddle to sniff out treason, and a broom, bound beneath, to sweep it away. Villages heard their hoofbeats like approaching plague. They were drawn from minor gentry, hungry men who owed everything to Ivan and nothing to boyar tradition. For them, service meant power. For him, their loyalty meant safety. He called them brothers, prayed with them, feasted with them, then sent them out to burn and hang and impale. At first, their prey was predictable. Boyars accused of treachery, nobles who whispered too loudly about rights. The Oprichniki confiscated estates, executed families, scattered serfs. Confiscated land became Ivan's private realm, revenue feeding his war chest. But paranoia is never satisfied with the obvious. Soon suspicion spread to merchants accused of trading disloyally, priests accused of disobedience, entire towns suspected of harbouring divided hearts. Nowhere did the paranoia erupt more savagely than in Novgorod. In 1570, Ivan convinced himself that the ancient merchant city, proud of its old liberties and tied by trade to Lithuania, planned betrayal. Whether evidence existed mattered little. His mind had decided. He marched with thousands of Oprichniki, surrounding Novgorod like an enemy fortress. For weeks, the city endured what chronicles later described with horror. Mass arrests, executions in frozen streets, nobles impaled, monks tortured, children drowned in the Volkhov River. Priests were accused of blessing treason, monasteries plundered, bells torn down. Tens of thousands may have died. The exact number is less important than the memory. Novgorod, once vibrant, was left broken, its independence erased by blood. For Ivan, Novgorod was not just punishment, it was theatre. Terror had to be spectacular to function. If he could annihilate a city suspected of disloyalty, then no village, no noble, no monastery could feel safe enough to whisper opposition. In his mind, this was security. To his people, it was madness sanctified by crowns. The Oprichnina soon became not only terror, but chaos. Minor gentry elevated as executioners abused power, enriching themselves with confiscated lands. Agriculture collapsed in confiscated regions. Peasants fled or starved. Commerce shrank. Chroniclers noted famine, villages emptied, Moscow itself strained. Ivan seemed unbothered. For him, destruction of boyar power justified destruction of wealth. If Russia must suffer to be purified, let it suffer. Even within his terror, Ivan indulged contradictions. He prayed with the oprichniki, listening to long services, confessing sins. He wrote pious letters, quoting scripture, presenting his campaign as holy cleansing. Then he unleashed new cruelties. Boiling cauldrons, mock coronations of condemned men before execution, grotesque pageants of punishment. He could kneel before icons for hours, then rise and order a noble family exterminated. To contemporaries, it looked like schizophrenia. To Ivan, it was consistency. Sin confessed, sin punished, authority reaffirmed. The people's view shifted from awe to dread. At first, many peasants admired a Tsar who humbled boyars, but as oprichniki began burning villages, seizing fields, killing without trial, admiration soured. Popular memory cast Ivan as both defender and destroyer, the ruler who crushed noble arrogance yet made ordinary life unbearable. Folktales preserve him as contradictory figure, both wise and cruel, both God's scourge and devil's servant. Paranoia consumed even those close. Ivan accused his own oprichniki of plotting, purged them, replaced them with others even hungrier. He suspected wives of poisoning, executed, or sent them to convents. Marriage became revolving door. He wed multiple times after Anastasia, discarding partners like garments, each union wrapped in suspicion. His court became stage of fear, courtiers careful never to breathe louder than icons. The wider world watched with unease. Ambassadors from England and the Holy Roman Empire reported a ruler brilliant and terrifying, courteous in diplomacy, savage in policy. Stories of Novgorod's sack spread through Europe, reinforcing Ivan's reputation as tyrant unique in Christendom. He corresponded with Elizabeth I, floated proposals of marriage, dreamed of refuge in England if betrayed. But behind his letters was the same nervous script. A man convinced betrayal lurked everywhere. By the 1570s, the oprichnina had burned itself out. Its violence left Russia weakened, not strengthened. Wars against Livonia drained coffers. Raids from Crimean Tatars torched Moscow itself in 1571, even as oprichniki were busy terrorizing their own. Ivan dissolved the oprichnina formally, but its ghost remained. Centralized autocracy, rule by fear, suspicion woven into the DNA of governance. Ivan's paranoia was not mere madness, it was trauma weaponized. The child neglected in palaces, the husband who lost Anastasia, the Tsar who believed poison in every cup. He turned private fear into public system. Russia endured, but scarred. Towns remembered the Black Riders with dog heads. Families whispered of relatives dragged away. Novgorod became proverb. And Ivan himself, kneeling before icons, never doubted he was God's instrument. The contradiction of his reign crystallized here. The people prayed for protection from Tatars and Poles and thanked the Tsar when victories came. The same people cursed him under their breath for famine, terror, and senseless cruelty. He was father and executioner, saint and fiend. The crown was both halo and blade. By the late 1560s, the man who once wrote laws and built cathedrals is almost unrecognizable. Ivan still calls himself Tsar of all Rus, still kneels before icons until his body shakes, still quotes scripture to justify decrees. But the calm reformer is gone, replaced by a ruler hollowed out by grief and swollen with suspicion. The oprichnina has wrecked fields, burned towns, and drained blood. Yet Ivan keeps feeding it, convinced that only terror holds the state together. His marriages mark the pattern. Anastasia, his first wife, had steadied him. After her death, he never found anchor again. He marries repeatedly, by some counts 7 or 8 times, each union short, poisoned by jealousy or discarded by decree. Some wives die suddenly, others are sent to convents, still others are humiliated in public before being cast aside. Chroniclers whisper of poisoning, of Ivan's own hand in their deaths. He sees betrayal in their eyes, conspiracy in their families, poison in every cup. For him, matrimony is no longer sacrament, but experiment, and every failure convinces him that the world conspires against his body. Paranoia extends beyond his wives. Courtiers vanish. Nobles who once feasted at his table are suddenly accused, tortured, executed. Priests are dragged from altars, accused of treasonous prayers. Even his oprichniki, those black-cloaked instruments of fear, are not safe. He turns on them, accusing them of treachery, replacing them with hungrier men. Loyalty buys only a delay, never immunity. Foreign wars magnify the spiral. His campaigns in Livonia, begun with ambition to seize Baltic trade routes, turn into quagmire. Armies march north, burn towns, besiege castles, and bleed resources. Sweden, Poland, Lithuania, and Livonian knights combine against him. Victories are rare, defeats costly. The war drags on for decades, draining coffers, scattering peasants, leaving Russia exhausted. The people begin to whisper. The Tsar spends lives for ports that never open. To the south, the Crimean Tatars strike relentlessly. In 1571, Khan Devlet-Gire rides with fire to Moscow itself, burning the city, leaving tens of thousands dead. The Oprichniki, supposed guardians, fail. Ivan flees north, returns to ruins, and answers humiliation with more suspicion. He blames boyars, generals, even the wind, never himself. The court becomes theatre of dread. Ivan forces nobles to grovel in rituals of abasement, demands confessions of crimes never committed, composes sermons that accuse entire estates of sin. He whips himself publicly for piety, then orders executions for treason. He oscillates between penitence and violence, between prayer and murder. Chroniclers compare him to a monk trapped in a butcher's body. And then, in 1581, comes the moment that seals his legend, the killing of his heir. Accounts differ in detail, but agree in essence. His son Ivan, the Tsarevich, had grown into a capable man, groomed to inherit. One day, he quarrels with his father. Some say over military policy, others over the treatment of his pregnant wife. The Tsar, in rage, strikes him with his staff or scepter. The blow lands on his head. Blood gushes. The heir collapses. Servants scream. The Tsar, realizing too late, weeps over the body, begging forgiveness. The Tsarevich dies days later, leaving Russia without strong successor. Artists, centuries later, will capture the scene. Ivan clutching his dying son, eyes wild, mouth open in grief. A man who killed the future with the same hand that had tried to secure it. Whether the blow was accident or frenzy, history reads it as symbol. The Tsar, who ruled by suspicion, killed the only person who might have carried his legacy sanely. The people hear the story quickly. Whispers say God has judged the Tsar, punishing him through his own bloodline. Nobles murmur that Russia is doomed to weak heirs. Monks write that the dynasty itself is poisoned. The incident becomes shorthand. Ivan is not just cruel, not just paranoid, but cursed. After the death of his son, Ivan grows more spectral. He continues to execute, to confiscate, to accuse. He continues to write letters thick with scripture, interpreting every defeat as punishment for sins, every famine as treason by subjects. His body weakens, his mind tightens. Foreign observers call him brilliant in conversation, terrifying in mood, unpredictable in decision. He can dazzle with theological argument 1 hour and order mass drowning the next. His people's relationship to him curdles into paradox. Some still see him as defender. He held Kazan, Astrakhan, resisted Tatars, terrified nobles who once exploited peasants. Others see him as scourge. He burned Novgorod, wasted armies in Livonia, killed his heir, starved villages. He is father and butcher, protector and executioner, saint and demon. They pray for his intercession with God and curse him in barns the same night. By the early 1580s, famine grips Russia. Plague stalks towns. War drags endlessly. The Tsar ages into illness, plagued by gout, ulcers, paranoia deeper than ever. He marries yet again, as if new wives can erase old grief. His court shrinks to flatterers, priests who echo his sermons, and guards who obey silently. The empire still bends around him, but cracks are audible. Ivan Grozny, the Terrible, which in Russian means both formidable and awe-inspiring, is now legend to his own people. Children are warned with his name. Chroniclers write of him in tones of both fear and prophecy. He has lived long enough to see himself become monster. And yet, even in his paranoia, he remains symbol of autocracy. The ruler who believed only suspicion could keep Russia whole, and improving it, left Russia broken. By the early 1580s, Ivan IV is a man whose body crumbles even as his suspicion sharpens. He is still Tsar of all Rus, still crowned and anointed, still capable of commanding armies, issuing decrees and dictating letters swollen with scripture. But his legs swell with gout, his stomach aches with ulcers, his face sags with exhaustion. His reign is a long winter, cold, relentless, and remembered less for beauty than for endurance. The Oprichnina is formally dissolved, but its habits remain. Ivan no longer rides with black-cloaked oprichniki, but the logic of terror continues. Arrests, confiscations, sudden executions. Even in his decline, he cannot resist purges. Boyars still fear every glance, peasants still mutter prayers against him. The machinery of paranoia has no off-switch. Religion consumes him more. He attends long liturgies, prays obsessively, fasts severely. He lectures clergy on doctrine, writes letters dense with biblical quotations, casts himself as scourge sent by God to cleanse Russia's sins. He sees in every defeat, whether famine, plague, or lost battle, proof of divine anger, to be answered with penance and punishment. His obsession is not gentle faith, but apocalyptic theatre. He is both sinner and prophet, flogging himself and others in a single act. Yet his appetites never leave him. He still seeks new wives, new unions. Chroniclers count 7, 8, perhaps more, marriages. Some end in sudden death, some in exile to convents, some in dismissal. Each failure convinces him of plots, poisons, conspiracies. Each wedding becomes less sacrament than gamble. His loneliness is visible, but he masks it with suspicion. Foreign policy offers no comfort. The Livonian War drags into its third decade. What began in the 1550s as ambition to seize Baltic ports ends in exhaustion. Sweden and Poland, Lithuania push Russia back, taking towns, humiliating armies. The Tsar, once conqueror of Kazan, is now architect of stalemate. His people, weary of taxes and levies, groan under burden. His dream of turning Russia into Baltic power collapses. The Crimean Tatars remain scourge from the south. Even after the sack of Moscow in 1571, raids continue. Villages burn, captives are taken, fear rides the steppes. Ivan fortifies borders, builds outposts, deploys armies. But his paranoia makes generals hesitant. Any failure may mean death, so men fight less boldly. The empire suffers less from enemies than from the Tsar's suspicion of his own. Within the Kremlin, court life shrinks into grotesque ceremony. Even stages confessions, forces nobles to abase themselves, demands theatrical repentance. He dons monk's robes, then reappears in regal splendor, playing both penitent and autocrat. He alternates between tears at icons and orders for executions. Chroniclers call him unpredictable, ambassadors call him terrifying. To many, he appears already half dead, living in visions more than reality. The people's view of him is ambivalent, even exhausted. To peasants, he is both shield and plague. He secured Kazan and Astrakhan, expanded Russia to the Caspian, brought Orthodox banners where Tatars once rode, yet he also burned Novgorod, wasted armies in Livonia, killed his heir, and emptied villages. Folk tales preserve him as figure both demonic and just, a ruler who punished thieves harshly, but who might also kill innocents for a whisper. He is a riddle peasants endure with icons in hand and curses in mouths. By 1583, Ivan is old by the standards of his century. He limps through Kremlin corridors, weighed down by furs and fear. His counselors tiptoe, his physicians bleed him, his priests scold him, his guards obey silently. He talks often of death, of judgment, of monasteries. He speaks of retiring to become monk, a thought both theatrical and sincere. But autocrats do not retire. They die on thrones or chessboards. And that is how he ends. On the 18th of March 1584, Ivan sits playing chess in the Kremlin. His opponent is a friend or boyar. Sources differ. He makes a move, leans back, and collapses. Some say stroke, others heart attack. Servants rush, priests pray, physicians panic. Within hours, he is dead. The man who ruled with terror for 50 years, who built Saint, Basils and burned Novgorod, who prayed like monk and killed like demon, is carried out of the Kremlin on a bier. Moscow does not weep loudly. The people, exhausted, cross themselves, whisper prayers for his soul, mutter relief that his suspicion can no longer reach them. Nobles calculate succession, priests chant requiems, chroniclers scribble. Ivan Grozny, the terrible, the formidable, has become memory. His death leaves Russia fragile. His son Fyodor inherits weak in body and mind, leaving the state to be managed by Boris Godunov. His grandson Dmitry is a child. Within decades, Russia will fall into the time of troubles, famine, pretenders, foreign invasions. Ivan's paranoia, his destruction of the boyar elite, his failure in Livonia, all contribute to the crisis. His reign preserved Russia by fear, but left it brittle. Yet his name endures. Ivan Grozny becomes archetype, the Tsar who made Russia tremble, who ruled by paranoia, who embodied both crown and cudgel. For centuries, Russians will debate him, tyrant or defender, saint or devil, necessary evil or unnecessary cruelty. For foreigners, he will be the first Russian most ever hear of, the man who killed his son, built onion domes, and bathed in suspicion. And perhaps that is the truest legacy, Ivan as paradox. A ruler remembered not for policy, but for personality, not for treaties, but for terror. He turned childhood trauma into governance, grief into paranoia, suspicion into system. He left Russia larger but weaker, feared but brittle, holy but haunted. The boy abandoned in a kennel died on a chessboard as Tsar. The people endured both. Death should have silenced Ivan. Instead, it amplified him. His body was buried in the Archangel Cathedral within the Kremlin, beside ancestors who had ruled more quietly. Priests sang, bells tolled, incense thickened the air. But outside the cathedral, people whispered, and whispers carried faster than bells. They said the earth rejected him. They said demons attended his funeral disguised as monks. They said God himself had allowed him too long and now punished Russia for his excess. In life, Ivan had been crown and cudgel. In death, he became rumour. Chroniclers wrote cautiously. Official accounts praised his victories, Kazan, Astrakhan, expansion of Russia's borders. They praised his zeal for orthodoxy, his defence of the faith against Tatars and Catholics. They described him as chosen instrument of God, scourge of sinners. But even in official texts, shadows slipped in. His cruelties were too large to erase. Chronicles admitted harshness, wrath, suspicion. Monastic scribes, safe behind cloister walls, hinted that his reign was punishment for Russia's sins, not blessing. Folk memory was sharper. Among peasants, Ivan became both tyrant and bringer of justice. Tales spread of a Tsar who could hear whispers across villages, who punished thieves so severely that golden cups could stand in the open without being stolen. But the same tales remembered his cruelty, drowning entire towns, burning families, killing innocents. He was remembered as both protector and butcher. To tell a story about Ivan was to tell two at once. Foreigners, less bound by loyalty, were blunter. Ambassadors who had seen him wrote accounts for their monarchs. A ruler brilliant in speech, encyclopedic in scripture, unpredictable in temper, monstrous in cruelty. German pamphlets, already seasoned by Saxon hatred of Vlad the Impaler, now found a new Eastern tyrant to caricature. English traders of the Muscovy Company returned home with stories of a Tsar who negotiated politely one day and ordered executions the next. To Europe, Ivan became archetype of barbaric despotism, exotic, terrifying, proof that Russia was a land of extremes. Even his image was contradictory. Portraits painted in his lifetime showed a thin, long-bearded figure with piercing eyes, draped in furs and crowns, one hand clutching scepter, the other a cross. To Russians, it was iconography, holy ruler. To foreigners, it looked like mask of fanaticism. Later centuries would exaggerate, prints showing him wild-eyed, blood-dripping, staff raised over his dying son. Whether faithful or not, such images stuck harder than reforms ever could. The church never canonized him, but he haunted orthodoxy's margins. Some clergy admired his piety. He built churches, endowed monasteries, debated theology with confidence. Others remembered the sack of Novgorod, when holy places burned and priests drowned. To call him saint was impossible. To call him devil seemed equally dangerous. So chronicles wavered, painting him as scourge permitted by God, terrifying but purposeful. The people carried ambivalence for generations. In famine years, they cursed his memory. In wars, they invoked his ferocity. Mothers warned children with his name, behave, or Grozny will come. Minstrels sang ballads mixing admiration and horror. Even centuries later, Russian peasants remembered him not as distant king, but as presence, half human, half spectre. Historians of later ages tried to tame him. The Romanov dynasty, rising from the time of troubles, had reason to both distance from and claim him. They blamed his paranoia for the crisis that followed, but they also pointed to his expansion of territory as precedent for their own. Poets of the 19th century, intoxicated by national myths, painted him as tragic hero, brilliant but cursed. Painters like Repin depicted him at his darkest. The famous canvas of Ivan clutching his dying son, eyes wide with horror, both murderer and mourner. That single image fixed him in Russia's imagination more than volumes of chronicles. The West by then had already absorbed him into its gallery of oriental tyrants. Alongside Timur, Vlad the Impaler and Ottoman sultans, Ivan stood as proof of Eastern despotism. He was cited in treatises, whispered in salons, written into novels. The killing of his son became central. What greater symbol of tyranny than a ruler who destroys his own heir? And yet Russians themselves never fully abandoned affection. Even peasants who cursed him admitted he made boyars tremble. Even nobles who feared him acknowledged he defended Russia's borders. Folktales sometimes called him Tsar Justice, punishing thieves and liars. He was remembered less as man than as weather, terrifying storm, but storm that kept enemies at bay. Thus, his reputation crystallized into paradox. He was reformer and destroyer, devout and cruel, protector and tyrant. To remember, Ivan was to argue about him. And that argument lasted centuries, shaping how Russians thought about power itself, autocracy as shield and scourge, ruler as both father and executioner. By the 17th century, time of troubles had confirmed the cost of his paranoia. Dynasties collapsed, impostors rose, famine and invasion ravaged. People looked back and said, Ivan planted these seeds. By the 18th, Peter the Great, another reformer accused of cruelty, was compared constantly to Ivan. Some called Peter the Second Grozny. Others said Peter was genius where Ivan was madness. Either way, Ivan remained yardstick. And beyond Russia, Europe saw in him not paradox, but proof that Russia was land of extremes, ruled by despots alien to Western moderation. For centuries, Ivan the Terrible was the Russian most foreigners knew. The man had died at a chessboard. The myth never left the table. Ivan IV left no peace behind him. He left territory, yes, Kazan, Astrakhan, Siberian outposts. He left monuments, St. Basil's Cathedral, cathedrals, monasteries. He left law codes, liturgical councils, fragments of reform. But above all, he left a scar, and Russia carried it forward like inheritance. For ordinary people, Ivan remained presence even after death. He was woven into proverbs. Fear the Tsar, but fear God more. The Tsar is far, but his cudgel is near. Peasant memory fused his reign into contradiction. Safe roads, but starving fields. Boyars humbled, but peasants crushed. Tatars defeated, but Livonia wasted. Some swore that only Ivan had kept thieves from their doors. Others whispered that he had burned their towns for suspicion alone. The people's ambivalence was not confusion, it was survival, acknowledging that power itself could be both protection and plague. His boyars remembered him differently, as executioner. They counted confiscated lands, dead kin, humiliations staged in Kremlin halls. Some had survived decades of terror, only to watch their estates shattered. For them, Ivan had proven that the autocrat could consume his own aristocracy. Later dynasties remembered the lesson. Fear works, but fear poisons. And once the poison seeps, stability withers. The church could not decide. Even built churches, endowed monasteries, debated scripture with bishops. Yet he drowned Novgorod priests, defiled sanctuaries, turned liturgy into accusation. Some monks wrote him as God's scourge, terrible but necessary. Others hinted at devil's mask. He could not be canonized, but he could not be erased. He became ghost in orthodoxy, a ruler too pious and too cruel to classify. Foreigners carried away the darkest portrait. To Europe, Ivan was proof that Russia was other, barbaric, oriental, cruel beyond comprehension. English merchants described his mood swings, German pamphlets his massacres, Polish chroniclers his paranoia. The story of him killing his son travelled faster than any law he wrote. In Western memory, Ivan became prototype. Russia equals despotism. It was a shorthand that persisted for centuries, colouring every ambassador's report, every philosopher's essay about the East. And yet, his reign also revealed Russia's durability. Despite terror, famine, war, Russia did not break. It endured. It absorbed his paranoia, survived his suspicions, stumbled into the time of troubles, and then climbed out again under the Romanovs. Ivan proved both the fragility and resilience of the Russian state. Fragile under suspicion, resilient in sheer endurance. Why did his paranoia matter so much? Because it became system. His childhood trauma, abandonment, boyar cruelty, hunger, turned into statecraft. He never trusted love, so he demanded fear. He never trusted counsel, so he created the oprichnina. He never trusted succession, so he killed his heir. What began as boy's wound became nation's burden. And in Russia's political imagination, that wound never healed. Later Tsars learned the lesson. Trust is weakness, fear is glue. The people, centuries later, still debate him. Was he necessary evil, defending Russia against Tatars and treacherous nobles? Or was he a tyrant who wasted armies, starved peasants, and killed his son? Both answers are true. That is why his shadow lingers. He is remembered not as hero, not as villain, but as paradox, the man who made Russia bigger and weaker at the same time. In Russian, Grozny means not only terrible, but formidable or inspiring. It is a word for thunder, for storm clouds, for forces both destructive and protective. That is Ivan's essence. He was storm given crown, thunder given staff, paranoia given empire. He terrified, but he also defended. He broke, but he also built. He killed his son and left his dynasty limping into chaos, but he also hammered Russia into a state that could not easily be unmade. When later rulers invoked him, it was always double-edged. Peter the Great compared himself to Ivan as reformer and autocrat, but insisted he was rational where Ivan was mad. Stalin, centuries later, admired Ivan's ruthlessness, citing him as example of necessary cruelty. Writers, painters, priests, peasants, all used his name as mirror, reflecting fears and hopes. What remains is not policy, but mood, suspicion as law, fear as glue, ruler as storm. Even taught Russia to expect that its Tsar might be both father and executioner. That expectation outlived him, shaping dynasties, revolutions, even modern rulers. And so Ivan the Terrible still sits on his chessboard in memory, eyes sharp, hand trembling, pieces scattered. He is dead, but the game he played, of paranoia and power, remains unfinished. Settle in, because our next story will cover Spartacus's revolt, as well as the story of the man himself and the fate of gladiators. Before anyone calls his name in the arena, Spartacus belongs to a world built on other people's backs. The Roman Republic of the 1st century BCE, loud in the forum, confident in senate halls, brutal at its edges, runs on slavery like a millstone runs on grain. Victorious wars in Spain, Greece and Asia Minor pour captives into Italy. Estates swell, chains multiply. In the countryside, great latifundia, the vast plantations of senators and equestrians, replace small farms, worked by gangs of slaves under the eyes and whips of vilici, overseers. In towns, household slaves cook, clean, tutor children, and carry their masters' litters through streets hung with triumphal wreaths. In mines, slaves die without count, swallowed by darkness and dust. The Republic praises libertas as a birthright of citizens. For the majority who are not, life is a ledger. Purchase price, annual yield, expected wear. Out of this economy grows an industry, part sport, part funeral rite, part entertainment complex, Ciliace's gladiatorial spectacle. Originally the Romans say, gladiator fights accompany funerals of important men, a bloody honour for a dead aristocrat. By Spartacus's time, the games have swollen into a civic addiction. Magistrates stage them to buy votes and glory. Entrepreneurs, Lanistai, run training schools to supply bodies. The Colosseum hasn't been built yet, that will come under emperors, but amphitheatres and temporary wooden arenas rise everywhere. Rome, Capua, Pompeii, provincial towns that want Rome's sound without Rome's price. The Ludus, the gladiator school, is a factory of combat dressed as a monastery of discipline. The one at Capua, run by Geniaeus Lentulus Batiatus, ancient sources vary the name, is notorious. A walled compound outside the city with barracks, training yards, kitchens, and an armory. Inside, men sleep on pallets in locked cells, wake to drills at dawn, and live under a rule as strict as any legions. And harsher, because obedience is enforced not by honour, but by ownership. The lanista is both coach and jailer, flanked by trainers called doctores and magistri who specialise. One teaches the mimeo with heavy shield and fish-crested helmet, another the retiarius with net and trident, another the secutor, the thraex, Thracian, the hoplomachus. Wood swords first, then blunted steel, footwork, guard, feint, hours of repetition until bodies move because they must, not because they will. Food is not the starvation ration of minds. Gladiators are valuable. They need muscle. The diet, thick barley porridge, beans, dried fruit, is heavy in carbohydrates, prompting ancient observers to call them hordearii, barley men. Physicians attend them. Some surgeries are excellent, resetting bones, stitching wounds, because a living gladiator can fight again. But care is economic, not compassionate. A man is an investment whose flesh yields dividends in ticket sales. Who are these men? Many are slaves, captured in war, sold on markets, sent to schools as punishment or profit. Some are criminals sentenced to ad ludum, a fate sometimes worse than crucifixion because it takes longer. A few are free men who sign contracts, octorati, seeking money or thrill. Their presence feeds Roman illusions that the games are voluntary sport, not organized murder. Almost none are Romans by choice, though the Republic's appetite is wide. Gauls, Germans, Thracians, Greeks, Syrians, Africans share dormitories, languages, scars. Spartacus, a Thracian, ancient writers disagree whether he once served as auxiliary soldier in Rome's army, arrives with a memory of mountaintop wind and a new reality, the clank of a door that locks from the outside. Treatment is a spectrum between cruelty and calculated discipline. Whips correct, shackles punish. Escape attempts draw exemplary torture, scourging, branding, shackling to a wheel, even execution before the cohort, to stamp out hope like a smouldering ember. Yet alongside the lash is a perverse kind of esteem, the trainer who corrects a stance with patience, the lanista who knows he must keep morale high enough that men learn, not so low they break. A gladiator who fights well is both asset and billboard. Patrons request him by name. Graffiti in Pompeii proclaims, Crescens, delight of the girls, and Celadus, the throng's heartthrob. Fame is real, if narrow and priced in blood. Inside the ludus, identity is both erased and remade. The school assigns nicknames: Crixus, Curly, Spiculus, Carpophorus, marketable brands shouted by bet-makers. The men learn comradeship the way soldiers do. Shared pain, shared drills, shared fear on the morning of a fight. They also learn calculation, how to fall to minimize injury, how to gauge a crowd, how to read a referee's hand. The rudis, the wooden sword of freedom awarded to a champion at retirement, hangs in every man's imagination like a second sun. But few reach it. The wooden sword is a story trainers tell to keep feet moving. Outside, Rome pretends the game's civilized savagery. Senators pontificate about discipline and courage. Philosophers tut about cruelty, but attend anyway. The people watch men die to learn how to live bravely. The crowd's moral arithmetic is simple. A good death redeems a slave's life. Mercy from the editor, the official who sponsors the games, proves noble generosity. Cruelty proves Roman fortitude. Are you not entertained? Is not a question. It is a policy. In private, grumbling about gladiators speaks to other anxieties. The Republic in the 70s BCE is cracking. The social war has shaken Italy, granting citizenship but loosening bonds of patronage. Two bloody civil wars, Marius versus Sulla, have taught Romans that legions loyal to generals, not the state, can march on the city. Sulla's prescriptions have normalized lists of men to be killed for political convenience. Slaves have already risen in Sicily, twice in revolts crushed with difficulty. Rome's economy oscillates between land hunger and debt crisis. Senators fight in court by day and with gangs at night. Against this noise, the games serve as narcotic and mirror. In the arena, Romans see controlled violence with rules they pretend still govern their politics. Gladiators at Capua hear news in scraps, a trainer's gossip, a guard's curse, a merchant's shouted prices. They know that Rome's hands are full, that legions are abroad, that the state is proud and distracted. They also know hunger, humiliation, and the body's endurance when choice has been shaved down to one edge. The ludus breeds both caution and fatalism. A man learns to plan to survive and also to accept that tomorrow's card may pair him against a bestiarius and a lion. Between those poles, a philosophy coalesces without books. Freedom is not an idea, it is movement without permission. Brotherhood is not doctrine, it is the hand that lifts your head when you fall in drills. Justice is not a speech, it is a whip that does not land on your back. Rome's law marks gladiators with a special taint. Infamia, a loss of legal and social standing that renders even a freed ex-gladiator suspect. A gladiator's oath, where repeated in schools, is bold: to be burned, bound, beaten, and killed by the sword. In signing, even the auctoritas accepts his degradation. The Republic's hypocrisy is thorough. It worships virtue while profiting from vice, claims to train men in courage while stripping them of honor, parades discipline while indulging in spectacle. Spartacus's revolt will later be described as a war of slaves. Before it is that, it is a correction, men refusing to be things. How do overseers keep grips on hundreds of armed men taught to kill? By separation and ritual. Weapons are locked when not in use. Live steel appears only under supervision. Guards sleep near armories. Rotations keep potential cliques from consolidating. Informers, always informers, flower in the cracks. The lanista mixes fear with reward. A fighter who obeys may receive privileges. Better food, more training, a chance at a staged victory that spares him this time. A fighter who plots disappears. Yet no system is perfect. In a school full of body and will, the smallest error can birth a break. One kitchen knife too many, a guard drunk from celebrating his sister's wedding, a supplier sympathetic to Thracians, a rumor the gates are weaker at dawn, probabilities multiply into opportunity. The moral lens through which Romans view gladiators blinds them to danger. They imagine their games prove the state's mastery over death. They do not imagine that the men they have trained to die well might prefer to live free, and might be capable of making the Republic feel, if only for 2 bloody years, what it is to be hunted. Of Spartacus himself, before the revolt, sources offer only shadows. Plutarch, writing a century later, calls him a Thracian of nomad stock, strong in body and noble in mind, with more Greek culture than his captors expected from a barbarian. Florus calls him a mercenary turned deserter, then bandit, then captive. Appian says little more. These scant lines allow imagination to clothe him, a man who has seen service, known organization, felt a spear fit right in hand, and learned enough Greek to argue. In the Capua school, he is not simply muscle. He is reading the yard, the men, the guards, the routine. He is doing what every survivor does, measuring. He would have been taught to hide the measuring under obedience. He would have learned, quickly, which doctors might be bribed with flattery, which guards responded to jokes, which fellow fighters could be trusted in a clinch. He would have watched Crixus, the Gaul with shoulders like beams and a rage that set teeth on edge, and judged him both dangerous and useful. He would have counted kitchen knives, measured the distance from armory to gate, observed that the fence's stakes were rotting here, that the master slept there, that the city beyond the walls hummed at dawn. Many in the yard do this. Few stitch observation into plan. The life Romans imagined for gladiators, a life of glory in a harness, cheered by crowds, capped by a wooden sword and freedom, rests on probability that fails most men. The life gladiators live is narrower and sharper. It produces not only fear, but clarity. Spartacus will later be praised as leader, strategist, philosopher of freedom. Before all that, he is a man to whom Rome has offered a whip and a sword, and he has decided the sword should not always lie in other hands. In the spring of 73 BCE, a shipment of kitchen knives will be hidden under baskets of tripe. The gate will be attempted, then the wall. 30 men will become 70, then more. The school designed to teach men to die will teach Rome instead how survival looks when chains are cut. But that night is not here yet. For now there is sand in the yard, barley in the bowl, and the knowledge, cold and bright, that men who are trained to fight for spectacle can fight for themselves. He is not yet a banner. He is a breath held between the whistle of a lash and the opening of a door. In the spring of 73 BCE, the Capua gladiator school prepares for another set of games. Lentulus Batiatus, the Lanista, counts his stock like cattle. Magistrates in Campania have commissioned spectacles. The amphitheatre needs blood. Weapons are checked, cells locked, diets heavy. For the men in the yard, nothing feels different, yet under the monotony runs current. Spartacus, Crixus, and a knot of others have measured the routines too carefully to believe nothing will shift. The plan begins with food. Ancient sources disagree. Some say kitchen knives were smuggled in under baskets of meat. Others that spits, cleavers, and skewers from the kitchens themselves were seized. Either way, the crucial fact is simple. Tools meant for cooking become weapons. Around 70 men band together, thrashing guards, breaking from barracks. The school erupts in chaos, shouts clanging iron, blood slicking the training yard. Those who hesitate are dragged along. Those who resist are cut down. The gladiators' first move is not toward freedom, but survival. They need weapons. They storm wagons headed for the games, seizing real steel meant for staged fights. Suddenly, men who only trained with blunted swords are gripping gladies sharp enough to gut legions. The image is startling. Rome's entertainment turned Rome's enemy. Men in practice harnesses wielding weapons with real intent. They spill out of the ludus, scale fences, scatter into Capua's outskirts. Local guards, unprepared, fall quickly. Capua's citizens panic. Some cheer. The ludus was hated after all, while others bolt shutters. Spartacus and his men strike for the countryside, heading toward Mount Vesuvius. Then, not yet the ruinous volcano history knows, but a rugged mountain with caves, vineyards, goat paths, and defensible slopes. It is perfect redoubt for fugitives. At first, they are a band of runaways, but bands attract strays, slaves from farms nearby, herdsmen, deserters, anyone with a grievance, drift into the camp. Within weeks, the group swells into hundreds. Discipline is shaky, but hunger for freedom is strong. Spartacus emerges as organizer. Crixus, fierce Gaul, commands respect with sheer physicality. Others lead smaller groups. But it is Spartacus who persuades men to stay, who sees that a mob can be hammered into army. Rome, at first, treats the escape like nuisance. The Senate commissions a praetor, Gaius Claudius Glaber, to suppress them. He marches with a militia, no legion, just hastily armed locals, confident the fugitives will scatter. He corners them on Vesuvius, blocking the single known path down. The rebels appear trapped, surrounded, hungry, doomed to be starved out. Glaber prepares to wait. Rome believes the revolt will collapse without effort, but Spartacus has imagination. The slopes of Vesuvius are covered in wild vines, thick and tough. The rebels weave them into ropes and ladders, clambering down unseen cliffs at night, circling behind Glaber's camp. At dawn, they burst in from the rear. Roman militia, unprepared, panic. Gladiators cut through lines like knives through rope. Glaber's force scatters. Equipment and arms fall into rebel hands. Spartacus's men laugh in disbelief. They have beaten Rome's first answer. The victory transforms them. They are no longer fugitives. They are army in embryo. More slaves pour in. Herds from Campanian estates, shepherds hardened by mountain life, disaffected peasants. The band swells into thousands. The countryside erupts, villas torched, storehouses looted, chains smashed. Wealthy landowners flee. The Senate frowns, but still underestimates. A second Roman force arrives, stronger. led by Praetor Publius Varinius. Again, Rome assumes amateurs will crumble before professionals. Again, Spartacus proves imagination is equal to discipline. The rebels ambush detachments, seize supplies, defeat Varinius's lieutenants. Varinius himself barely escapes, his fasces captured, symbols of Roman authority paraded in mockery. Rome cannot laugh it off anymore. By late 73 BCE, Spartacus commands tens of thousands. Estimates vary wildly, 30,000, 40,000, even 70,000 at peak, but all agree. The revolt is no longer a handful of gladiators, it is war. Campania and Lucania writhe with burning estates, panicked senators, terrified towns. Rome's senatorial class feels the revolt not only in fields, but in wallets. Slaves are their wealth, rebellion is their bankruptcy. The rebel's life is both exhilarating and brutal. Freedmen taste autonomy for the first time, yet discipline is hard to impose. Some groups plunder indiscriminately, slaughtering civilians, looting temples. Spartacus tries to restrain, punishing excess, sparing captured Romans when possible. Ancient writers describe him as unusual, merciful by standards of rebellion, sparing enemies who fought bravely, restraining cruelty. His leadership begins to look like philosophy, freedom not as riot, but as order against Rome's injustice. Crixus, however, less restrained, leads Gauls and Germans in separate raids. The camp splits in factions, unity strained. Some seek vengeance, others simply survival. Others, perhaps Spartacus most of all, see larger horizon. A march north, across the Alps, scattering homeward to Gaul, Thrace, Germania. Escape, not conquest. But Rome will not allow scattering. To the Senate, thousands of trained fighters loose in Italy is existential threat. By 72 BCE, consuls themselves are assigned. Lucius Gellius Publicola and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Clodianus. Two armies converge. For a moment, it seems Rome will crush rebellion under sheer weight, but Spartacus is not yet finished. He defeats Lentulus, then turns and smashes Gellius, killing Crixus in battle but honouring him afterward with funeral games, forcing Roman prisoners to fight in mock gladiatorial matches, a grim reversal of spectacle. Even in victory, Spartacus frames revolt as mirror. Rome is made to see itself in chains. Each battle strengthens him. Each Roman defeat embarrasses Senate. Soon, even ordinary citizens begin to whisper admiration. Graffiti appears in towns. Spartacus, lover of freedom. The myth grows as fast as the army. Yet victory breeds dilemmas. The rebels are huge, but not uniform. Many want only loot. Some want revenge. Others dream of permanent settlement. Spartacus insists on a plan. March north, escape Italy, scatter back to homelands. Twice he tries to lead them north toward the Alps. Twice factions refuse. Gauls and Germans break off, preferring plunder. The mass cannot be disciplined. Rome, battered, gets time to regroup. The revolt has become something larger than rebellion. It is philosophy and practice, men refusing infamia, claiming humanity against Rome's denial. But philosophy struggles against appetite, and Rome, humiliated, prepares to send not consuls, not praetors, but a rich senator with ambition, discipline, and patience. Marcus Licinius Crassus. Spartacus has taken a school and turned it into an army, a nuisance into a war. Rome, which thought to starve him on a mountain, now understands. It faces not just fugitives, but a man who sees that chains can be broken, and that those who break them may fight like no legion ever trained. The next campaigns will decide everything. For now, Italy trembles, estates burn, and a Thracian exile named Spartacus has shown Rome its own cruelty, reflected back in steel. By 72 BCE, Spartacus is no longer shadow in Campania. he is storm across Italy. Villas smoulder, slave chains dangle empty, towns fortify their gates at rumour of his march. Rome, humiliated by defeats of praetors and consuls alike, sends out proclamations, raises levies, and tries to explain to citizens how the republic that mastered Carthage now struggles against a Thracian fugitive. Spartacus, meanwhile, looks north. The Alps rise like promise on horizon. Beyond them lies Gaul, Thrace, Germania, lands where fugitives might scatter homeward, dissolve army into freedom. Ancient sources hint at his strategy. He never meant to conquer Rome, only to escape it. He tells his followers the road north is salvation. They cheer, at least many do, but unity is brittle. The army is vast, maybe 60,000, maybe more. It is not a legion, it is multitude. Gauls, Thracians, Germans, shepherds, runaway slaves, deserters, even some free poor who prefer plunder to poverty. They share hunger for freedom, but not discipline. Spartacus tries to drill them like soldiers, enforcing marches, punishing disorder, sparing prisoners when it suits him. He wins loyalty through charisma and vision. Yet rival leaders pull different ways. Crixus is gone, killed in battle with consuls, but his Gaulish and German followers remain, eager for vengeance. They prefer raids, loot, and battle to long marches. They mutter, "Why flee Italy when wealth lies in villas and cities here?" They resist discipline, break off to plunder. Spartacus cannot stop them all. Still, victories pile up. The consuls Lentulus and Gellius are defeated in turn. Spartacus's army smashes Roman detachments, seizes supply trains, arms itself better each month. Defectors join. Captured Roman standards are paraded, symbols of Senate's shame. Rome trembles. The roads of Italy, once arteries of control, are arteries of rebellion. Senators whisper of another Hannibal, another foreign terror roaming Italy unchecked. Spartacus marches north in earnest, winter of 72. He defeats forces in Cisalpine Gaul, opens road to the Alps. The dream is close enough to taste, but then the army halts. Ancient writers puzzle, why did he turn back? Some say the mass of slaves refused to leave Italy, preferring plunder. Others say factions within his army resisted scattering. Freedom far away seemed abstract compared to loot nearby. Still others imagine Spartacus himself hesitated, sensing that Rome would never forgive, that home might not welcome fugitives who had slaughtered their way across Italy. Whatever the truth, the chance passes. Instead of climbing Alps, the army turns south again, back into Italy's belly. Rome breathes again. Opportunity lost, the Republic can rally. Factional splits worsen. A large group of Gauls and Germans, discontent with Spartacus's discipline, break away entirely. They are soon crushed by Roman forces, thousands slaughtered. Spartacus laments but cannot prevent. His authority is great, but not absolute. He commands respect, not obedience. His army is both his creation and his limit. It fights like storm, but disperses like smoke. Still, even turning south, Spartacus continues to embarrass Rome. He defeats Roman governor Cassius Longinus in battle, then defeats praetor Gaius Tremelius Scroffa. He roams Apulia, Calabria, Lucania, threatening city after city. He even marches close to Rome itself, encamping within sight of the city. Panic erupts. Senators imagine him storming the walls, freeing slaves in the capital, toppling Republic itself. But Spartacus does not attack. He knows his mob is not siege army. Rome's walls are too strong. He threatens, then withdraws south again. This choice feeds both admiration and critique. Admirers see discipline. Spartacus refuses futile bloodshed, avoids annihilation. Critics see weakness, the chance to end Rome wasted. For his followers, Rome's shadow is terrifying. Even free men hesitate to test it. For Romans, relief mixes with shame. a man who could have attacked refrained. The Senate grows desperate. It appoints Marcus Licinius Crassus, richest man in Rome, as commander. Crassus brings discipline Rome's militia lacked. He rebuilds legions, enforces harsh punishment, even revives decimation, executing 1 in 10 soldiers of cowardly units. His brutality frightens his men into fighting. At last, Rome has general who understands seriousness. Spartacus, sensing tide turning, tries again for escape. He marches south to Calabria, hoping to find ships to cross to Sicily, to reignite old slave wars there. He bargains with pirates, offering gold for transport. But pirates betray him, take money, vanish. The army is trapped in Italy's tow, supply lines thinning. Rome seizes opportunity. Crassus fortifies Isthmus of Calabria, digging trenches, building walls, trying to pen Spartacus in. Yet Spartacus breaks out again, storming Roman works, cutting through, proving one last time that ingenuity can pierce legions. He remains undefeated in open battle. But attrition bites. His army is weary, divided, hungry. Factions splinter, discipline frays. Crassus presses relentlessly, refusing mistakes of earlier commanders. By early 71 BCE, confrontation is inevitable. Spartacus, hemmed in, prepares for final battle in Lucania. His men, once dreaming of Alps, now face certainty. No escape, only clash. Spartacus sacrifices horses to the gods, declaring he will fight on foot like his men. He addresses his army, not with speeches preserved in books, but with acts remembered, killing his own horse, swearing never to flee. For him, freedom is not destination anymore, but act. To die fighting, not chained. Rome trembles even in preparation. The Senate, anxious, recalls Pompey from Spain and Lucullus from Thrace to aid Crassus. Crassus fumes. He wants victory for himself. But the Senate's fear shows scale. One Thracian fugitive has made Republic deploy all its giants. As Spartacus prepares, his philosophy crystallizes. He is not philosopher in bookish sense. He leaves no writings. But his revolt itself speaks. He believes men should not be things. He believes courage matters more than chains. He believes discipline can turn slaves into soldiers. He believes freedom is worth dying for. The Alps dream is gone. The Sicilian plan failed. But the rebellion has already achieved something astonishing. It forced Rome to see its own slaves as people who could fight, plan, and terrify. Spartacus has turned Rome's entertainment into Rome's nightmare. The final clash approaches. But before spears meet shields, before blood stains Lucanian fields, Italy has already changed. The Republic knows now that its empire rests on fault line. Millions enslaved, one revolt away from chaos. Spartacus does not need to win final battle to prove his point. The war itself has proved it. The winter of 71 BCE is hard. Spartacus's men, trapped in southern Italy, feel hunger press harder than Roman steel. Supplies dwindle, pirate allies have betrayed them, factions mutter of desertion. Crassus, with 6 legions, presses relentlessly, tightening noose. Pompey returns from Spain, Lucullus from Thrace. Rome has mobilized its titans. What began as nuisance of gladiators is now full-scale war. The Republic marshalling against a man who once slept in Capua's barracks. Spartacus knows time is short. Ancient writers say he tried once more to negotiate, offering Rome return of prisoners if allowed safe passage. Crassus refuses. Rome cannot compromise with rebellion. Precedent would be poison. No peace is possible. The field will decide. The final battle takes place in Lucania, near the river Silarus. Spartacus assembles perhaps 30,000 men, a shadow of peak numbers, but still formidable. Crassus commands 40,000, disciplined legions hungry to erase humiliation. The rebels lack cavalry, their infantry weary. Yet Spartacus refuses despair. He sacrifices his horse before troops, declaring he will fight on foot and win or die with them. It is not rhetoric, it is vow. The clash begins with fury. Rebels charge, desperate, breaking through Roman lines in places. Spartacus himself fights like storm, cutting down centurions, pushing toward Crassus directly. Sources say he aimed to kill Roman general personally, to end war with blade. He slashes through shields, wounds on his body mounting, still pressing forward. But numbers tell. Surrounded, bleeding, Spartacus falls. His body is never found, swallowed in heap of dead. The rebellion collapses with him. Tens of thousands of rebels are slaughtered. Ancient writers say 60,000 die that day. Survivors are few, fleeing, hunted. Crassus claims victory, but Senate ensures Pompey shares credit. Pompey intercepted stragglers in the north, writing to Senate that while Crassus broke main force, he plucked the war out by the roots. Political rivalry smothers even battlefield triumph. Rome answers rebellion not just with death, but with spectacle. 6,000 captured rebels are crucified along the Appian Way from Capua to Rome, a highway lined with rotting bodies, each nailed to wood, each reminder carved into air. This is the fate of slaves who rise. Travelers for months pass between rows of crosses. Merchants, senators, peasants all see. The Republic teaches with terror. For Rome, the victory restores pride. But beneath, anxiety lingers. Spartacus revealed fault line. Italy filled with slaves who might revolt. Senate passes stricter controls. Laniste watch gladiators more carefully. Slave collars, inscribed with "Hold me lest I flee," become common. The Republic strengthens walls around system, but cannot erase memory. Crassus gains triumph of sorts, though Senate denies him full honours. Pompey overshadows, later rising to greater command. Yet both men, with Caesar, will soon form first triumvirate, turning Republic into stage for ambition. Spartacus's revolt is buried under new civil wars, but memory remains. Senate's greatest fear is not Gauls, not Carthage reborn, but its own chains breaking. What of Spartacus? Ancient writers struggle. Plutarch praises his courage, calls him noble even as slave. Florus dismisses him as bandit. Appian records strategy, but sneers at origins. None can ignore his scale. A slave who fought Rome 2 years, defeated consuls, terrified Italy. Rome will not give him grave, but history grants him shadow. The crucifixions linger longest. 6,000 bodies along Appian Way are not only punishment, they are Rome's confession. To keep Republic alive, thousands had to die in agony, publicly, deliberately. Liberty in Senate rests on wood soaked with blood. The contradiction is too glaring to ignore. Republic built on libertas is republic preserved by mass crucifixion of men who only wanted same. Travelers remember. Some whisper pity, others approval. Some slaves passing crosses feel despair, others feel seed of defiance. Legends sprout. Spartacus still alive, Spartacus watching, Spartacus ghost on wind. Rome killed bodies, but story walks. In short, the final battle is slaughter, but also revelation. Spartacus proved Rome could be bled by its own chains. The crosses proved Rome feared its slaves more than foreign kings. The Republic resumes routine, but routine now tastes of iron. The Appian Way glitters with iron nails and stiffening bodies. 6,000 rebels crucified in a line from Capua to Rome is both punishment and proclamation. For months, travellers breathe rot, smell despair, and remember. Merchants avert eyes, peasants cross themselves, magistrates whisper reassurance. The Republic is safe again. But safety is brittle. Spartacus may be dead, yet Rome's fear has only begun. The Senate reacts not with reform, but with repression. Owners tighten control. Collars fitted on slaves bear inscriptions, If I flee, return me. Overseers increase whippings. Laniste and gladiator schools impose harsher discipline. Amphitheatre still roars, but behind stage walls security doubles. Roman elite pretend revolt was anomaly, not symptom. But memory nags. Sicily had already seen 2 slave wars. Spartacus was third. Rome knows fourth could come. In politics, victory is divided spoils. Crassus, who rebuilt Roman discipline and crushed rebellion, expected glory. He receives triumph, yes, but Senate blunts it, fearing his ambition. Pompey, fresh from Spain, claims he finished war by destroying fugitives, and Senate applauds louder. Rivalry between Crassus and Pompey deepens, animosity that will soon entwine with Caesar, birthing triumvirate that unmakes republic itself. Spartacus's war, in irony, helps feed political machine that devours Rome's liberty. For ordinary Romans, memory splits. To plebs, revolt is both terrifying and tantalizing. They saw thousands crucified, but they also heard tales of consuls humiliated, of legions broken, of a Thracian slave who defied Senate for 2 years. Graffiti in backstreets whispered his name. Some admired, most feared. For masters, Spartacus's warning. The men who cook, plough, clean and fight might one day rise. For slaves, his name becomes quiet legend, story of one who fought Rome itself. Roman writers frame narrative to preserve dignity. Florus dismisses revolt as bellum servile, a slave war, unworthy of true history. Appian records campaigns, grudgingly admitting brilliance, but underlining servile shame. Plutarch alone grants Spartacus nobility, calling him a man not only of great spirit and strength, but in understanding and gentleness superior to his condition. Even so, Roman memory insists on boundaries. Spartacus was admirable, but still slave. The Republic cannot admit equality. The consequences ripple deeper. Fear of revolt sharpens class tensions. Legislation about slaves becomes harsher. Governors in provinces warn to watch plantations. Yet paradox, gladiatorial games grow more extravagant after Spartacus. Rome needs louder spectacles to reassure itself that it still controls bodies. Each fight in arena becomes ritual exorcism. Look, the slaves obey. Look, order endures. Every cheer is nervous denial. Economically, latifundia continue. Slaves still toil in fields, still die in mines. Nothing structural changes. Rome cannot abandon system without abandoning empire. So instead, Rome perfects violence. Crucifixion, already common, becomes standard threat. Soldiers are trained to suppress uprisings faster. The message is carved into law. Rebellion equals annihilation. And yet, the story refuses burial. Even in antiquity, Spartacus becomes symbol larger than his body. He is ghost in Senate's fear, echo in plebs' gossip, warning in masters' dreams. Centuries pass, empire replaces republic, crucifixions line roads less often, amphitheatres grow into colosseum, slavery remains, though transformed. Spartacus's war recedes, overshadowed by civil wars of Caesar and Pompey, by empire's grandeur. But every few generations, chroniclers mention him again, astonished. Slaves once terrified Rome. In Christian centuries, his story changes flavor. Martyrs crucified under emperors mirror crucified rebels of Appian Way. Some early Christian writers hint, Spartacus's men died like Christ, though for different gospel. The parallel is imperfect, but potent. Crosses along road recall Calvary. In medieval Europe, memory grows faint, but resurfaces in Renaissance humanists rediscovering Plutarch. Spartacus re-enters conversation as noble barbarian, tragic figure. In Enlightenment, philosophers seize him as example of resistance to tyranny. In 19th century, revolutionaries in Europe invoke his name. Karl Marx calls him the finest fellow in the whole of ancient history. Socialist movements celebrate him as proto-revolutionary, fighter for class freedom before class existed. In popular culture, the myth blossoms further. Plays, operas, novels recast him as hero. In 20th century, cinema immortalizes. Kirk Douglas raising chin in Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus, slaves shouting, "I am Spartacus," in chorus of solidarity. Hollywood smooths rough edges, but message endures. Rebellion against chains is noble, even if doomed. The irony is thick. Rome crucified him to erase example. History canonized him as symbol. Crassus, Pompey, even Caesar, all senators, consuls, commanders, are remembered as politicians in textbooks. Spartacus, Thracian slave, becomes icon across centuries, invoked by Marxists, anarchists, filmmakers, rebels of every stripe. Rome feared him because he proved slaves could fight. History remembers him because he proved men could refuse chains. The aftermath of his war shows contradiction at Rome's heart. Republic that praised liberty relied on slavery. Republic that boasted of law crucified thousands without trial. Republic that called itself eternal trembled before kitchen knives turned into swords. Spartacus forced Rome to see hypocrisy, even if briefly. And the people who lived after, peasants, masters, senators, carried that paradox. To masters, Spartacus was nightmare to deter. To slaves, he was miracle to whisper. To Rome itself, he was scar to hide. Yet scars endure. Spartacus left no writings, no speeches survive, no manifestos etched in stone. What we know of his philosophy comes not from his own hand, but from the choices he made, whom he spared, where he marched, what he asked of his men. Yet those choices tell us much. He did not seek empire. He could have marched on Rome itself. Some say he even encamped within sight of its walls. But he did not storm them. He understood his horde of shepherds, deserters and slaves could not breach fortified capital. His plan was escape, not conquest. March north, scatter across Alps, vanish into homelands. Freedom for Spartacus was not dominion over Rome, but absence of Rome. He restrained cruelty more than most leaders of revolt. Ancient sources record that he punished excesses, forbade pointless slaughter, spared brave prisoners, buried dead with honor. He staged funeral games for fallen comrades, forcing Roman captives to fight, yes, but in parody of Rome's own cruelty, as if to show mirror. He was barbarian in Roman eyes, yet he practiced discipline Romans themselves admired. What he believed, we reconstruct, that men should not be property, that courage could rewrite fate, that brotherhood mattered. His philosophy was pragmatic, born of chains. Liberty is not abstract, right, but daily act of refusing. For slaves, freedom was not scroll in senate, but sword in hand. What of gladiators after him? Rome tightened chains. Training schools became prisons more fortified. Weapons guarded more closely. Lannistae feared repetition. Yet the arena endured, more popular than ever. Citizens cheered as men fought, pretending order restored. Gladiators still swore oath to be burned, bound, beaten, killed by the sword. They still trained, still died. Spartacus did not end the system. But every gladiator after knew someone had once broken wall, fought Rome, died free. That memory weighed heavier than wooden sword of retirement. The revolt's consequences were paradoxical. Rome reaffirmed slavery, but also revealed its anxiety. Senators legislated, generals bragged, but plebeians remembered humiliation. For decades, masters looked nervously at kitchens, fields, barracks, fearing spark. Rome's power endured, but cracks showed. Empire built on unfree labor knew rebellion always possible. Spartacus's legacy swelled after his death. To Romans, he was both shame and warning. To Christians later, he looked almost martyr, crucified men on Appian Way echoing Calvary. To Enlightenment thinkers, he symbolized struggle against tyranny. To Marxists, he became proto-revolutionary, model of class war before class existed. To Hollywood, he was hero of solidarity, slaves shouting, "I am Spartacus," claiming identity as act of rebellion. His paradox is sharp. Historically, he failed. His army was slaughtered, his body lost, his men crucified, slavery continued. Practically, nothing changed, yet symbolically, he triumphed. 2,000 years later, his name still lives, invoked wherever chains are broken. Failure in fact, victory in memory. Why? Because Spartacus showed Rome, and later ages, that the most oppressed can terrify the most powerful. He proved that property can rise as person, that entertainment fodder can become army, that a Thracian slave could shake republic to foundations. Even crucifixions did not erase, they advertised. Appian Way's line of bodies became Rome's confession. This is what it takes to keep our order. And future centuries looked at that road and saw not triumph, but indictment. Philosophy emerges here, that freedom is not gift from masters, but seizure by the enslaved. Spartacus lived it. His revolt was not about ideology, not about Senate seats or tribunes' speeches, but about breath, the right to breathe without permission. For 2 years, thousands did. That is why his story endures. His life also illuminates contradiction of gladiators. Romans glorified them as models of courage while branding them infames. They cheered their discipline while despising their status. They praised their deaths while refusing them dignity in life. Spartacus tore mask away. Gladiators were not things, but men who could organize, lead, terrify. Rome never forgot, even if it tried to laugh. So Spartacus stands in history as figure of paradox, defeated general, eternal symbol. Rome killed him to erase him. History resurrected him to remind us. His revolt failed, his memory won. His men crucified, his story canonized. Crassus gained triumph, Pompey stole credit, Senate claimed order restored. Yet who remembers Crassus's speeches, Pompey's letters? It is Spartacus whose name rings in streets 2 millennia later. For the Republic, his war was wound. For us, it is mirror. It asks, who profits from chains? How long can order survive on backs of unwilling? What happens when property decides to be person? Rome answered with crosses. History answered with legend. On Appian Way, travellers once passed between thousands of rotting bodies. Today, they pass ruins of aqueducts, stones of empire, echoes of name, Spartacus. He remains ghost, reminding empires. Beware the slaves you train to die, they may one day fight to live.